Welcome to Rotten Drew's December Love Hate List 2020. We're finishing off the year right. We're telling you what we loved and what we hated from this month's music releases.
This week, Erlon, Rotz, and I are going to come at you with reviews of 6 albums each and let you know what albums belong under the Christmas tree and what albums deserve to be left in last year, 2020. We also, of course, address one special album that the two of us assigned to one another.
Sometimes we recommend albums that we think the other will like. Sometimes we just want to put a little trash in the other's ear. If you like these recommendations, please subscribe. We do these every month. And check out last month's recommendation and see what you might have missed from them.
So let's get into it, Salmon family. Let you know what albums are worth your time and which ones belong in the trash. Let's get to it. All right, so first off, we are going to start with KG, an album by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. Now, this is a band that I've heard about for a long time and never listened to, probably in part because of the name of the band, which is just kind of so ostentatious and confusing. It just never has particularly appealed to me. But it was assigned to me by Erlon Rotz, and so for that reason, I will give you my 2 cents on it. And I have to say, I was really impressed by this album. This was a very good album. It had a really interesting sound that, I don't know, I think at the time that I heard about this band, I was always hearing references to kind of metal, or I assumed the guitars would be too heavy for me. But what I found on this album was instead a lot of sounds of more, it wasn't the guitar I was expecting. I mean, one, it sounded to me at least like there was maybe a lot of sitar on this album, and that was really cool. It had a very interesting psychedelic sound and fit a lot more into my conception of psych rock than I would have expected in a really, really good way. And so you had tracks like, just the opener, for instance, or even later ones like Honey, where they took you on kind of this kind of sitar, jangly guitar-based journey that really well suited the journey of the album, that really well suited just kind of taking you to another place mentally. So this album was a total surprise for me, and I really, really liked it. It's an easy love for me. Also, a shout out to songs like Minimum Brain Size and Odd Life, which again take this very kind of wailing, caterwauling vocal style and apply them really well to these locked in grooves that are very catchy and honestly will stay with you. This is an album that makes me want to go deeper into their catalog and work my way backwards. And based on this, I'm expecting, 16 albums in, that some might work more for me than others. But this was a great introduction, and I really love the groove of this album.
I'm going to be starting out with Sam and Drew's recommendation from last month, Pink Sifu and Fly Anakin's Fly Seafoods. Fly Seafoods is one of the most fun rap albums that I've heard this year. It's taking a comedic approach to a job that I think generally many people think is pretty cool, but a little bit laid back, kind of boring. Working at a record store is, I can't lie, it's not something I definitely didn't apply to at some point. Pink and Fly's attitude is, it's lazy and it's funny. The beats that are on here are kind of repetitive. They've got some older vibes to them. They really remind me of Monster Valley. The interludes are cheeky, they're entertaining. They're kind of walking you through a day at Fly Seafoods, and I actually quite like them. The jazzy tunes are smooth and relaxing to listen to. And the flows are gentle, and they've got a lot of really intriguing rhymes. I don't think that this is like a very prolific album in terms of what it's trying to achieve. I think it's a little bit more back in the pocket, just kind of gently showing off of some of what Fly and Pink can do. But I don't really think that's a bad thing that it's so low key. I think it's actually, it's really refreshing and fun because it is done very, very well. Their transitions to and from the interludes and samples, they're really clean. They're really non-intrusive. Many of these songs have cartoony or silly vibes to them, but they also have a lot of lyrics that are very relevant to the time. They're a little bit more serious, and they're not trying to just tell a bunch of jokes and leave. They are trying to get out a message about what has happened over the past year. And not just the past year, but last century. Even the Richard Pryor joke that was sampled at the very end of the Richard Pryor song. The joke is very funny, but in this context, kind of takes a little bit more of a serious tone. It's a little bit more ominous. The highlights here are everywhere: the beats, the lyrics, the flow, the style, and just how this concept album comes together is really nice. I definitely recommend this to any hip hop head out there. Pink and Fly were both rappers that weren't often on my radar, even though I was very much aware of these two. And now I think I'll be keeping my eyes open in the future much more for these two. Definitely a love. I appreciate Sam and Drew recommending this.
Next up, we have Ichiro Alba's Windswept Adan. And this was a very, very cool album. This was an artist I had no frame of reference for, which it's kind of nice to go in sometimes and just see what you find and see whether you like the artist or if you respond to what they're doing at all. And so Ichiro Alba's name is one that just kind of popped up, and I decided I would take a look into this album, and I was really, really struck by it. This is a very cool album. It reminds me in a lot of ways of kind of like a Vashti Bunyan album, and I really have a lot of respect for that artist, and so I use that compliment really kindly to say that there is an interesting mix of Ichiro Alba's voice, which is really, really beautiful, has that kind of high-pitched upper register that you might think of with certain kinds of folk singers. There's a lot of acoustic guitar in this album, but also some sort of pseudo ambient elements like some piano, and sometimes you'll hear other almost like string-like instruments, just kind of as light accompaniment, but generally it's a pretty sparse space that leaves a lot of room for her voice. So I thought this album was very cool in that regard, and it just has some moments, especially as the album goes on, that will really surprise you. So you have songs like Porcelain near the beginning that put you in a certain space, kind of remind you of like that very look-aftering sound by Vashti Bunyan. But by the end, as it's sort of spreading out into something a little kind of darker, more ambient, more spacey, songs like Chino Kaze really kind of take you into a different tonal space. And I thought this album was really, really good. This is a love for me, but I'm intrigued to see what this artist does next, because this was kind of a left field entry for me. I know she has a few albums, but I'm really excited to hear whatever's next for this aspiring young artist.
Next is another collaborative album, Boris and Merzbow's 2R0I20P0. In other words, RIP 2020 with RIP integrated in between 2020. So Boris and Merzbow have come together once again for another collaborative album. It's not uncommon that hearing Boris and Merzbow to most people is kind of unknown. A lot of people maybe have only heard of them once, or just kind of heard of something that they have done and not really even attached the name to it. But they both do have a sizable cult following. Boris is a Japanese sludge/doom metal band that's been around since the 1990s. Their Pink album being their latest peak in 2016. Boris is known for their slow tempos, drones, down-tuned guitars and bass, and minimalism in their rock music. Merzbow being slightly less liked by people, but has gained a notoriety in the internet as the most important artist in noise music. Noise music being just that, noise. His Pulse Demon record from 1996 is infamous for being unlistenable. Generally, most of his music does sound like a lot of static to the untrained ear, and not to even say that a trained ear is going to enjoy the sound in the first place, but maybe pick up on tiny little details here and there. There generally isn't any discernible rhythm or melody from the music that he makes, and the majority of his expansive library is very similar. Now that they're back together, you're probably kind of wondering what this abomination of an album would sound like. And if you like some experimental music, I think some people are going to find some surprisingly great music here. Merzbow doesn't let up with his sounds of static. Phasers, drones, that's all there. But when it's mixed with Boris's light vocals and distorted guitars and very slow drums, the sound actually blends pretty beautifully. There's moments where the static kind of peaks and changes and like just kind of jars you a little bit, but there's other moments where the noise blends in so well. It's actually a really nice part of the harmony. Noise is no easy instrument, but Merzbow, being one of the masters, does have his moments where he shines, and the noise actually kind of amplifies the music and what's going on around it. Other times, he really just kind of jabs you with that sound, and it's much more unpleasant, but not to the degree that the rest of his library does. Most of the tracks are dominated by Boris, with Merzbow just kind of being a constant feature, like lurking here and there. But there are tracks like Coma where Merzbow is actually taking control of the show, and Boris is just kind of playing lightly to fill this scenery that Merzbow is creating. Generally, I'm not a big fan of Merzbow or Boris, but together I think they actually complement each other very well. This is definitely worth a listen to those of you who enjoy noise or doom metal. And it's an insane piece of work. I will say that. It's not the easiest track list to listen to, but it's not as difficult as I might make it sound. If you like the slow effect of sludge metal or doom metal, this is probably a good track to have underneath your sleeve. I'm going to say that I love it just because I think it is very good. But personally, I don't know that I listen to it much more often just because of my personal taste. So it's kind of living in between love and hate, but generally I do have a very positive look on this album.
Next on the list is Currency Spita. Welcome to Jet Life Recordings. And it's hard not to talk about Currency, the maverick rapper who's been independently releasing music for, at this point, decades, and frankly has gone on kind of a tear, in terms of releasing sometimes as much as an album or a mixtape a month. But he does come to us with a new project, Welcome to Jet Life Recordings, that is pretty sparse. I mean, it's pretty compact. It's not much more than 10 songs and less than 40 minutes, but at the same time, it has, I would say, some of the best and the worst of what you've come to expect from our buddy Currency. I mean, this is a guy who, has a song on here, High Rise, where the chorus says, "Let's smoke a big joint," and that's really where this project is coming from. It's kind of maybe a limitation in some ways. And frankly, there are more songs that are in that space than there are ones that have the really snappy, beautiful Currency production that, get you in the mind state of this guy who's kind of like a verbal wordsmith, making certain kinds of associations that can really blow your mind. There's really not as much of that on this project. And in some ways, it is kind of at a loss in that regard. There are a few tracks that will bring to mind the Currency you may know and love, like Neighborhood Superstar is a banger. It's a really, really good one. But for the most part, these will kind of just fly by you. And sometimes even the way they interact with his kind of weed head identity is a bit of a clunker, I would say. So unfortunately, I am going to have to put Welcome to Jet Life Recordings in the hate bin. It just didn't really move me in the way that the best Currency albums do. The Pilot Talk series stuff kind of does. It just kind of flew right by me, unfortunately, or maybe it was a little more tethered to the ground. So it was a fun listen, but it doesn't really improve the Currency format that much. And I eagerly await whatever our friend Currency does next.
Next, I'd like to talk about Salami Rose Joe Lewis's latest album, Chapters of Zdenka. The brain feeder climate scientist Lindsay Olson has dropped this wonderful little album, Chapters of Zdenka. If you haven't heard of Salami Rose Joe Lewis, I'd expect that you will begin to hear this name a lot more in the years to come. The album is a collection of abstract pop pieces. Many of them are only about a minute to 2 minutes. They're really dreamy, they're really spacey. There's lots of light and airy vocals that are drifting along. It's not uncommon for these tracks to just kind of switch up halfway through either, or just start using very strange sounds to move the beat along, such as a cough. Weirdly enough, what Olsen is trying to do here, it works and it keeps me entertained front to back. The lyrics here are often about heartbreak or very depressing views of the world and other people, but it is more often than not that she's self-aware of this and has the confidence to know what she really deserves out of life. Do You Care and Fuck Eager to Please, they fit this narrative very well. I'll say that while her vocals aren't great or anything that unique generally. She more than makes up for that with her witty lyrics and bizarre, catchy beats, slowly kind of chugging this along. In my opinion, I think this is an underrated album. Definitely recommend that anybody give this a listen. You do yourself a favor and experience the fun, kooky weirdness that this album manages to capture. Highly recommended.
All right, gang. Next up, we have an album that is very exciting. Steve Lacy's The Lo-Fis. And this was one that dropped with very little press. I don't think most people might even be aware that this came out, but if you're familiar with a band like the internet, or just sort of float around that space of some of the jazz cats that hang out with Kendrick Lamar, then perhaps you have heard of Steve Lacy. And if so, I strongly recommend you check out this project. The Lo-Fis is very short. It's only 25 minutes and only around a dozen songs, but these sketches have a really vibrant personal quality to them that make it worth your time. There are some tracks on here like You or Infernami that will totally catch you off guard, that will brighten up your day, that have a really warm, a vibrant sound, and sort of take a neo-soul aesthetic but put it through a Minecraft blender, right? It's quick, it's fast paced, it's kind of TikTok-y in a way, even if you want to go there. But either way, there's just a lot of warm emotion and really good songwriting on this album that you can go, oh, I wish it was longer, I wish it was more developed, and maybe Steve Lacy will get there eventually. But the reality is that these sketches just have a lot of life to them. And they also kind of work on a minimalist style that I think Steve Lacy has been pushing for a long time. So if you're looking for something warm, something kind of with some heat to keep you satisfied this winter, then Steve Lacy's The Lo-Fis is a great choice. This is a very easy love for me, and I really hope more people will check this one out, just because it didn't get that huge press rollout when it released.
All right. Landshapes is an indie band that was initially the members of Lulu and the Lampshades. Most people probably don't know much about these guys, and that's a shame, actually. They teamed up with producer Quest on this album, Contact, and the final product is a fun and punchy listen. The guitars play really interesting, slightly distorted melodies. There's tons of strange harmonies with digital instruments and powerful lead vocals over the top. Drama is a track that, once it gets started, like at the beginning, just gets me pumped every time. The bass guitar is really clean and catchy. The distorted vocals are really cool and spacey. Personally, I think a little bit less effects would have probably done a little bit better on in terms of the vocals. It is in no way game breaking. It's more just of my opinion. I would prefer to hear more clean vocals and distorted vocals at times. In my opinion, the opening isn't nearly as strong as the middle and the end of the album, even though it's not very weak. It's just, it definitely lacks a little bit more once you've heard the album all the way through. Rosemary Through Drama is not bad, but The Ring is where things really start to pick up, and they're so smooth, and it's just gliding through more acoustic sounding indie vibes, and then they kind of blossom to larger than life sounds on tracks like I'm Mortal, and they go all the way to experimental tracks like Let Me Be, using much more digital sounds and distortions that work very, very well. The range is wonderful, and putting this on and just enjoying it, you wouldn't ever guess that this isn't a major artist. The music here is worth listening to, and this is a small enough band that nobody is going to have ever heard of them, but they'll thank you for showing them. This is a hard love.
Next up on the list, we have We Will Always Love You by the Avalanches. This is a strong album with a strong message at the end of the year. It's a highly anticipated one as well, being that this is only the third album by the Avalanches in about 20 years. It's exciting for that reason, and it's a beefy album. It's not extremely long or anything like that, but it is 25 songs, and it does have a gajillion features, basically, with anybody from Cornelius to MGMT to Johnny Marr. I mean, you could find anybody on this thing, and that's part of the fun. It did have a really strong album release over this year where 5 singles from it were put out already. But that being said, with so many songs on the album, you won't feel like you've already heard everything. It's also loosely kind of a concept album, or at least one where you hear bits and pieces of voicemails and messages reoccurring throughout the album that give you something to digest that's not just the music. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Frank Ocean's Blonde in that regard, at least in so much as there's use of other additional messaging material in the album. Although, of course, being that the Avalanches are generally sample-based artists, this isn't surprising that they would use a kind of mixed media approach. In general, I found this album really, really strong, and it's one I want to keep listening to because I felt like I couldn't get everything out of it, even in the time we had to review these albums. It's one I definitely think I will be listening to in 2021, and it's for that reason that I'm going to assign this album to you, Erlan. It just has so much going on in it that I want to know what you think about it and see what parts you respond to. So I definitely want you to give this one a listen. And in general, this is a love for me. It's an early love and one that I hope I'll be able to continue listening to and getting something out of for the rest of the year, because tracks that don't even have any features like Overcome or Music Makes Me High really, really, really blew me away. Or really just surprised me so much with what they had to offer.
And now we're going to be talking about Legrand Spam Fervent. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I might not. If you thought that Land Shapes was a small speck on a huge world, Legrand Spam fits snugly on that little tiny speck. Their range and talent is just beyond anybody in this video. This approach is not a traditional one, nor is it often looked at or enjoyed, but Fervent is a monster of an album. Often made mostly through vocals, Legrand Spam is an experimental collective of avant-garde musicians, many appearing to be classically trained and very, very highly talented musicians. This encapsulates some of the most amazing sounds that humans can ever make. The music is abstract and beautiful as the album covers are, using intense groups of vocals, thundering drums, ambient soundscapes, piano and faraway vocals, and even just strange sounds that humans can make, such as rolled R's or just very strange tongue sounds, makes for a very unique sound that is not annoying for avant-garde music. I don't know enough about this group to pretend that I know what this is about or even exactly what languages that they might be speaking. But from the standpoint of somebody who has no context for what this band is or what the music is, it's really enjoyable. It's really interesting, albeit weird. Le Trance, the opening track, is nearly 20 minutes long, nearly half the album, and it's kind of broken into various parts. Le Trance has the most rewarding and interesting pieces of the album, in my opinion. If you're unsure about listening to this album or this group, listen to Le Trance and just see how far you can really get into it and just kind of consider it a mini album. I guarantee you'll find some interesting stuff just in Le Trance, and it goes from different directions all in this one track. The production is only fine. There isn't too much done here, as classical pieces often experience lack of any real production. So it's not a huge complaint, as it's something I've kind of come to expect, but with music like Legrand Spam, some detail into the production would actually serve them much more than some of their other classical contemporaries. Yi Yin is broken into 8 tracks, and it sounds very strange to the untrained ear, possibly sounding like random sounds and noises. But to classical musicians, you can really kind of get a grasp of how difficult this piece is to play and how insane whoever this composer is was just to create this thing. Those that are more in tune with modern and postmodern world of Western art music are definitely going to appreciate this as an incredible work of art, even as just the performance, not even just writing this. It's just crazy. I recommend this to people who love the weird and bizarre, but often like my recommendations, it's not fit for everybody. If you're classically trained, you might be inclined to enjoy this a little bit more, but if you're still on the fence, like I said, try out Le Trance. See if you love it. You're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. But personally, I can't keep my ears from it. I enjoy it.
Coming up next, we have Your Old Droog's Dump, Your Old Droog, Crutoy edition, which I have to say, very unique title, very unique artist. I mean, this is a guy who kind of rose to prominence because people thought he was actually Nas. And I mean, that's quite a compliment to his rapping style. I've liked a lot of what Eurodruke has done in the past, so I was intrigued to hear this album, and I definitely saw that I think on this album he was trying to carve his own lane a little bit more, trying to find his own space in hip-hop, and so a lot of his Eastern European identity is really brought out in the names of the songs, in the styles of the beats, in the baby photo that is on the cover, another very Nas move, if you will. Truthfully, this seemed like an exercise almost in rapping over very obscure beats. There's kind of an MF Doom, Mad Villain, R.I.P. vibe without all the it's not the weirdness, it's not the psychedelia side of it, it's more the kind of organ grinder, just sort of unusual beats. And you really hear this on a track like Uzbekistan or one like Babushka 3. I mean, these songs and some of the samples and things give you little insights into where this guy is coming from. It really wasn't enough for me to connect with his story. It's not quite the level of A$AP Rock, just bars, bars, bars. I mean, there's a little bit more personality than that, but in some ways, not a whole lot more. So while I tried to engage with these songs and found it interesting who all showed up on them, I mean, people like Billy Woods or people like Fonte, I mean, really interesting features for the most part as well. But I just felt like there was a density or sort of an ability that by the time I got to the end, and I'm hearing these kind of, interesting samples and stuff like that, it's all stuff that I feel like if you're going to take that kind of like hard snub-nosed rap and then make me want to engage with you as a person, I think it would have benefited from being a bit more front-loaded, or at the very least needed a more three-dimensional approach. For me, the bars treated me well, but I just didn't quite get there was something in terms of the personality that I was missing on this one. And so for that reason, I'm gonna have to put it in the hate bin. I don't think this one's gonna stick with me. Didn't quite do it for me. But I do respect the effort and the attempt to diversify his style.
You think you know me. JPEG Mafia has released another album or a single compilation titled EP. It's a lot of the singles that he's dropped throughout the quarantine period. JPEG kind of taps into that short attention span that everybody's got by not letting a single minute go without some interesting twists and turns. The aggression is here as usual, as well as the bizarre beats and sick humor. The opening track, Bald, has a remix that comes back in only 2 tracks away. This fits almost as a reprise, as his first verse is repeated, but the rest of it completely changes once Denzel Curry swipes a track from him. And it changes the dynamic entirely. And he does a very good job, by the way. The tracks change and they evolve over time, namely Covered in Money, which is, I believe, the longest track. The vocals JPEG Mafia has on this go from some of the hardcore and overly bombastic lines that he displays on Veteran to the auto-tuned singing and gentler side of him that is introduced in All My Heroes Are Cornballs. The production is really punchy and nice, often lo-fi and slightly overblown, and a kind of tasteful Tyler the Creator's Igor style, but to a lesser degree, much lesser degree. Something to note here is that immediately after dropping this, he did announce EP2 for release, which what we can assume will be 2021. Whether or not this is going to be released as singles again is unknown, but the fact that a previous single, Last Dance, is not featured on EP1, it may be preemptive to review this without its second half, but as it stands, it's a strong, short piece that encapsulates JPEG Mafia very well. Compilation is definitely a love for me, a recommendation that I think is easier for digest for those who have not really dived into Peggy yet. I think that Veteran is still his best album yet, but like All My Heroes Are Cornballs, this stacks up very well and sees his music maturing very nicely.
Finally, we have Kid Cudi, Man on the Moon 3. This was an interesting one, to say the least. I really wanted to like this album so badly. I wanted to go in and, be impressed by modern Kid Cudi just sort of, vibe out on like something expressive and emotional and something that would take me somewhere. And this album was ultimately just kind of a huge dud. I found that while it started off really strongly, I mean, a song like Tequila Shots in the first couple songs is like great. It makes it sound like a modern update of the Kid Cudi sound. It's sort of him blending in well with what music sounds like today. Whereas as the album goes on, you just find more and more that, things like having a Trippie Redd feature or a Phoebe Bridgers feature, or just sort of these ways he's trying to connect with what's going on right now, fall flat for the most part. But even more than that, it's the songs that don't work or that try to apply what he does, but in a very awkward way. I'm thinking of songs like Pale Moonlight, just ones that really, they're just kind of awkward. I mean, even Mr. Solo Dolo 3, it's like they're just kind of slow, and his voice, which used to have this very floaty way of kind of weaving in and out of the song, sometimes the lines just really sound weird and awkward, and they don't hit the way that you would want them to. And I think the songs that he's actually most successful on this album are the faster, more upbeat ones. But when he goes for these sort of slow, melodic, dirgy ones, they're just kind of a bummer, and the lyrics and songs themselves just don't connect. So for that reason, I'm going to have to put this in hate. And I say that having really tried hard to like it, wanting to like it, but this album just did not work for me. And it was pretty poorly executed as you go through the whole experience of listening to it.
Last, I have Ocul's Melano. I might be butchering some of these names, so forgive me. But Ocul is a small black metal dark ambient band that's dropped Melano. This is fucking brutal and very well done. The vocals are airy, dry screams that perfectly blend into the aggressive drums and riffing guitars. The melodies shredded throughout this album are wonderful and really fun to listen to. I'm a fan of metal, but I can be quite picky about the metal genre more than any other genre. I don't just love any metal band, but this one quickly grabbed my attention, and even with their long tracks and the shortest landing in just over 6 minutes, they kept my attention. Somniloquy is a fantastic grinding opener that eases you into the undeniable black metal gold that they're about to drop. Fignalian is the longest track at 12 minutes and begins with a dark monologue by the creature-esque vocals that were shown before, bringing the thumping track in, and the speed and consistency of the drummer is absolutely insane. I gotta tell you, this is a really, really amazing drummer. Sucky Bear is more in the dark ambient realm, but quite heavy for ambient. There's a lot of sound that's going on here, so it can be difficult to say ambient, but maybe the only other word for this is soundscape. But it is still vaguely musical, as most ambient music is. The track list is short, but the album still has a great amount of meat here. I highly recommend this to any metal lovers out there. Just because you may never have heard of them does not mean that they are not worth your time, and that rings true for many of the albums today. All right, and now it's come time for me to recommend something to you, Sam and Drew. And I'll say there's a lot of really good ones here, and I'm not 100% sure, so I'm just going to decide on the fly here. I could recommend Legrand Spam for its insane, vast music range and very strange avant-garde vibes. Salami Rose Joe Louis is a brain feeder artist that I think you'd really enjoy, just hearing about how much you like artists like Flying Lotus. Landshapes is also another indie band that I think definitely should not be overshadowed. And JPEG Mafia is an artist I don't think that you've dived into too much that I personally really like. But I think what I'm going to recommend to you is, I think I'm going to recommend Salami Rose Joe Louis, just because I know you'll like this, and I don't believe you've heard of her. And I think that she's an artist on the rise that I think you'll enjoy very much.
That wraps things up for me as far as the albums go. Really excited to hear what Erlan Roth assigns me, and I will do my dutiful listening. But other than that, we are glad that you have checked out the Rot and Drew format this year, that you've embraced us starting this new project. If you like what you're seeing, definitely feel free to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment about what you're listening to or what you want us to review next, and we'll hop right on it. But keep in mind that this is a format that we're trying out. We'll probably change it up as we go into next year. Please do expect to keep hearing about new music from us. We are excited to dig deep into new music and share it with you, but know that it's always in flux because we want to give you the best experience we can. If you like what you're seeing from Salmon House World, check us out on other social media and give us a follow or a like, or just connect with us and let us know what's going on in your world. 2020 was a wild year, but we're glad you spent it with Salmon House, and we will see you on the other side. Welcome to 2021, and hopefully the music lives up to the promise of a new year.
But we'll keep doing this every month, so keep your eyes open, subscribe, follow us on social media. We'll let you know when we post, and we'll see you next month.